Welcome to the Shadow of History channel. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out more videos like this one. During the May Day demonstration in Lviv in 1968, a young schoolgirl was photographed by Pavlyuk Ilya among the crowds, her presence quietly capturing the human face of Soviet-era public life in Ukraine. In the bustling streets of 1960s Istanbul, a drunken patron is carried home in a basket by one of the city's hired basket men, porters by day, who took on this unique second role at night to earn extra income. Introduced at the end of the 19th century, stair dust corners were a simple yet clever household solution designed to keep dust from settling in staircase corners and make everyday sweeping considerably easier. Published in 1953, this Soviet caricature titled "Priorities" used pointed visual satire to critique the United States, reflecting the sharp ideological tensions that defined the early years of the Cold War. Photographed just 12 months apart, these two images of John Lennon capture how swiftly youth, fame, and the relentless pace of life with the Beatles could visibly mark a young man's face and bearing. In 1962, New York law enforcement officers posed with a significant heroin seizure, offering a rare documented glimpse into the city's mounting battle against organized drug trafficking during that era. In Montreal in 1939, women stepped out wearing specially designed plastic headgear, an unconventional yet practical invention intended to shield them from the harsh force of winter snowstorms. Taken in Japan in 1920, this mirror selfie is a striking reminder that the human impulse to capture one's own reflection is far older than the technology we associate with it today. In 1945, Nazi Major General Anton Dossler was bound and prepared for execution, facing justice for war crimes committed during a conflict that had left millions dead across an entire continent. In the summer of 1953, a young John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier were photographed together shortly after their engagement, the image quietly marking the beginning of one of history's most iconic partnerships. Captured in 1979, this photograph of a Denver Broncos cheerleader preserves a vivid snapshot of American sports culture during an era when professional football was cementing its place at the heart of national life. In 1942, RAF pilot Francis Mellersh paused between wartime missions for a calm haircut, a pipe in hand, and a First World War novel open beside him, a Supermarine Spitfire standing watch in the background. On the 28th of July, 1945, a U.S. Army Air Force's B-25 Mitchell bomber struck New York City's Empire State Building between the 78th and 80th floors while flying through dense fog, killing 14 people and causing roughly $1 million in damage. Once a grand centerpiece of Cincinnati's public life, the city's historic library stood for decades before it was demolished in 1955, replaced by an office building and parking lot that give no hint of what once stood there. In 2004, during the war in Afghanistan, a U.S. military dog paused beside the body of a fallen soldier, a quietly devastating moment that needed no words to speak to the cost of war. Finnish sniper Simo H. Fei, known as the White Death, recorded over 500 confirmed kills in fewer than 100 days during the brutal 1939-1940 Winter War against the Soviet Union on the frozen Finnish front. From 1988 until 2006, Iranian refugee Mehran Karimi Nasseri lived within the terminals of Charles de Gaulle Airport, stranded in legal limbo after losing his papers and finding himself unable to prove his identity to either French or British authorities. At Al Capone's 1931 trial in Chicago, members of the mob shielded their faces from press cameras, a fleeting but telling gesture of men accustomed to operating in the shadows suddenly caught in the full light of public scrutiny. In 1941, New York City hopeful Gino Franceschini built himself a neck stretcher to gain the quarter-inch he needed to meet the fire department's height requirement, only to fall short. Still, not even a self-inflicted bump on the head could close the gap. In late May 1944, among Hungarian Jews awaiting death at Auschwitz-Birkenau, an SS photograph captured a small child offering a dandelion to an older boy, a fleeting moment of innocence preserved from a place where all those pictured would soon be murdered. In 1916, a boy stands proudly between two enormous mounted lobsters caught off the New Jersey coast, a striking reminder of the ocean's extraordinary bounty in an era long before modern fishing transformed the sea. A vintage photograph from the 1970s captures Marceline Bertrand, mother of Angelina Jolie, in a quiet portrait that preserves a private moment belonging to a woman who would raise one of Hollywood's most iconic figures. In June 1944, as Allied troops fought through Normandy, a determined English brewery loaded kegs of beer onto Spitfires to deliver a taste of home to soldiers on the front lines of liberation. Created around 200 to 150 BC and recovered from the grounds of Alexandria's Great Library, this 2,000-year-old Egyptian floor mosaic, depicting a dog beside a knocked-over gold vessel, is among the oldest surviving examples of domestic Roman-era artistry. In 1952, a military pilot who landed on the wrong aircraft carrier faced the immediate and very public consequences, a moment that captures both the precision demanded of naval aviation and the swift accountability that followed any lapse. On the 20th of June 1945, 15,000 American soldiers crowded the decks of the Queen Elizabeth as she pulled into New York Harbor, their journey home marking the long-awaited end of the Second World War. Photographed in a family portrait in 1927, a 19-year-old Frida Kahlo stands dressed in a suit, already quietly defying the expectations placed upon young women in early 20th century Mexico. Captured in 1900 at the precise and ungovernable instant of a sneeze, this old portrait is a rare and entirely unposed glimpse of utterly human spontaneity frozen by early photography. In September 1906, Mark Twain sat in a rocking chair on a porch in Dublin, New Hampshire, relaxed and unhurried in the company of his cat, a casual image that softens the towering legend into a simple, contented man. Standing before their not-yet-opened restaurant in San Bernardino, California, in November 1948, the McDonald brothers could not have imagined that the modest building behind them would one day become the blueprint for the most recognizable fast food chain on Earth. Around 1930 at the Berlin Zoo, a handler gave Roland a 4,000-pound elephant seal, a snow bath, a strangely tender moment between a man and one of the ocean's most formidable and rarely domesticated creatures. Photographed in 1898, the oldest house in Hamburg had stood since 1524, nearly 4 centuries of history quietly embedded in its walls before it was demolished in December, despite protests from local residents who fought to save it. Captured in the 1960s, a lone skateboarder carves through Central Park at speed, a symbol of a restless youth culture that was quietly reshaping American cities long before skateboarding became a recognized sport. In 1912, at the Maggioni Canning Company in South Carolina, 6-year-olds Josie and Bertha and 10-year-old Old Sophie were already beginning their workday at 4 in the morning, their small hands put to labor in conditions that would eventually drive sweeping child labor reform. Bernard Cole's 1944 photograph titled Shoemaker's Lunch captures a quiet midday pause in a working man's day, a small, dignified moment of rest preserved during one of history's most turbulent years. Photographed in 1881, a shy young woman caught mid-smile by the camera offers a warmth and lightness rarely glimpsed in the stiff and formal portraiture that defined photography's earliest decades. In 1965, a young Marine private waited alone on the beach at Da Nang, his youth and stillness set against the weight of a war that would define and divide an entire generation of Americans. In what was then Leningrad around 1924, Soviet citizens played a life-size game of human chess in the streets, a spectacle that blended public entertainment with the cultural experimentalism sweeping revolutionary Russia. Photographed in 1948, these three men from the Windrush generation arrived in Britain as part of the historic wave of Caribbean migrants who came between 1948 and 1971 aboard ships, including the Empire Windrush, fundamentally reshaping British society. A Filipino, American family gathered for a formal portrait in the Philippines in 1912. Their composed expressions framing a quiet moment of family identity during an era of profound colonial and cultural transition across the islands. Taken by the power plant's own photographer at dawn on the 26th of April, 1986. This is the earliest known photograph of the Chernobyl disaster, an image captured at the very moment the world's worst nuclear accident began unfolding. Photographed in London in 1908, a young Winston Churchill steps toward a waiting taxi still years away from the wartime leadership that would make him one of the most consequential figures of the 20th century. A 1937 photograph of a Seattle lumberyard stretches rows of timber across the frame, capturing the industrial scale of the Pacific Northwest's booming timber trade during the final years of the Great Depression. In the 1990s, Chris Farley posed for a cheerful beach photograph with his father on the shores of Lake Michigan, a rare personal glimpse behind the larger-than-life comedic persona that made him a beloved figure of his generation. In 1961, 152 cats lined up in Hollywood to audition for a role in the 1962 film Tales of Terror, only to discover the part had already been quietly given to a professional cat before a single audition took place. In 1959, Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis were photographed at home with their daughters, Kelly, and a young Jamie Lee Curtis, a candid family portrait capturing one of Hollywood's most glamorous couples in an ordinary domestic moment. At the August 1966 opening of Caesar's Palace, Jimmy Hoffa and Josephine Hoffa stood at the entrance of the casino his Teamsters Union had helped build, backed by a $500,000 loan that made the legendary Las Vegas landmark possible. In the 1960s, President Kennedy was photographed with his daughter Caroline, who wore a mask bearing her father's own face, a playful moment of childhood innocence that briefly dissolved the weight of the presidency into simple family joy. Deep inside a frozen ice grotto in 1911, members of Robert Falcon Scott's Antarctic expedition gazed through the ice toward the distant silhouette of their ship Terra Nova, human figures utterly dwarfed by the vast indifference of the polar world. In 1970 South Korea, a soldier forcibly cut a young man's hair in public during a government crackdown on long hair and short skirts, a stark image of state authority being wielded against personal expression on the street. In the 1960s in southeastern France, Pablo Picasso drew a centaur in the air with a light pen, sculpting an imaginary figure from darkness, with the same casual mastery he brought to canvas throughout his remarkable career. In 1937, a young woman smuggled a small camera into the United States Supreme Court, hidden inside her handbag with a hole cut for the lens, producing one of only 2 photographs ever taken of the court while in session. In 1991, Princess Diana shook hands with an AIDS patient without wearing gloves at a time when fear and misunderstanding about the disease was still widespread, a deliberate and compassionate act that carried enormous public weight. Photographed in 1913, Tsar Nicholas Romanov and his wife Alexandra posed with their 5 children, Tatiana, Marie, Anastasia, Olga, and Alexei, in a family portrait taken just 4 years before the revolution that would end their dynasty and their lives. After attending Bill Clinton's inauguration in 1992, outgoing President George H.W. Bush gazed back at the Capitol from his departing helicopter, the image quietly capturing the solitary and irreversible moment of relinquishing power. In January 1939, 23-year-old Joe Arity handed his toy train to a fellow inmate before being taken to death row, a mentally disabled man with the mind of a child, executed for a crime he did not commit, smiling because he did not understand what awaited him. Photographed around 1982 on the set of Return of the Jedi, the actors behind the Ewok masks revealed the entirely human faces hidden inside the costumes, offering a rare behind-the-scenes glimpse at the illusion that enchanted a generation of filmgoers. On the 1st of June 1989, in Tiananmen Square, a student protester raised 2 fingers in a V for victory before a line of People's Liberation Army soldiers, just days before the military crackdown that would make this image one of the most haunting of the late 20th century. In 1968, Elvis, Priscilla, and a young Lisa Marie Presley were photographed relaxing at home, a warm domestic image from a period when the most famous entertainer in the world was navigating the quieter rhythms of family life. In 1979, the Carter administration installed 32 solar panels on the White House roof, a forward-looking gesture toward renewable energy that would be quietly removed by the following administration just a few years later. Photographed in 1947, Arctic explorer Peter Freuchen and his wife Dagmar Kohn, fashion illustrator and woman of distinct elegance, sit together in a portrait that unites 2 remarkable lives lived at the furthest edges of adventure and art. A boy stands at his front yard lemonade stand in 1973, the image a small and enduring symbol of childhood entrepreneurship that has remained almost entirely unchanged across the decades of American suburban life. In Seattle, Washington in 1994, Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic of Nirvana stood together at the funeral of Kurt Cobain, their grief public and unguarded, marking the end of a band that had fundamentally altered the sound of a generation. During the Second World War, Michelangelo's statue of David was encased in a protective shell of bricks, a quiet act of cultural preservation that placed priceless human artistry inside a fortress of stone against the threat of wartime bombing. In the 1920s, a small-scale model of Gutzon Borglum's design for Mount Rushmore offered the first physical vision of what would become one of the most recognizable monuments ever carved into the American landscape. Photographed in 1955, the Las Vegas Strip appears as a sparse and dusty road with a handful of low-rise buildings, bearing almost no resemblance to the blazing, towering city of spectacle it would become within the following 2 decades. In 1928, Soviet peasants gathered around a radio to hear it for the very first time. their expressions of wonder and concentration capturing a world on the edge of transformation as modern communication reached the farthest corners of the countryside. In 1977, George Willig scaled the exterior of the World Trade Center's South Tower in 3.5 hours, was arrested at the top after signing autographs, and was fined just $1.10, 1 penny for every floor he had climbed. In 1947, a maintenance worker walked down the main cable of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, a solitary figure suspended high above the bay, in a photograph that makes utterly visible the staggering scale of one of the world's great engineering achievements. Here is Charles Ebbets in 1932, perched on a steel beam high above New York City, photographing the construction workers at lunch on the unfinished Empire State Building, the man behind one of the most iconic images in American photography, himself becoming the subject of one. An ecstatic customer celebrated the release of Windows 95 with unbridled enthusiasm, capturing a moment of genuine public excitement around a software launch that marked a turning point in making personal computing accessible to millions of ordinary households. On Sunday, the 3rd of September 1967, Sweden switched overnight from driving on the left side of the road to the right, an enormous national logistical undertaking that required an entire country to relearn a fundamental habit of daily life. A 1956 photograph of a Pepsi bottling factory in Baltimore, Maryland, captures the humming industrial machinery of post-war American consumer culture at the height of a boom that was reshaping how the nation ate, drank, and lived. In 1944, on the Orot Peninsula, American troops carefully tended to a wounded dog amid the chaos of combat, a small act of compassion that reminds us that even in the most brutal conditions, the bond between soldiers and animals endured. Photographed by Albert Kahn in 1914 in one of the earliest known color photographs of Paris, the original Moulin Rouge stands vibrant and intact just 1 year before a fire would consume it entirely, an image that now carries the quiet weight of an accidental farewell. In Paris, in 1963, a photographer captured the dramatic climax of a puppet show at the precise moment the dragon was slain, freezing a performance of pure theatrical magic in an image as alive and expressive as any stage production. Stanley Kubrick filmed the scene of Wendy Torrance backing up the stairs with a baseball bat in The Shining 127 times. A relentless pursuit of perfection that physically and emotionally pushed his cast to their absolute limits. In 1901, Annie Edison Taylor posed proudly with the barrel that had just carried her over Niagara Falls, becoming the first person in recorded history to survive the plunge, at 63 years old, and lived to tell the story. A woman strolls along Rue de la Paix in Paris in 1950, her easy stride through one of the city's most elegant streets, offering a serene post-war glimpse of a city slowly returning to the grace and rhythm of everyday life. Between takes on the set of Star Wars, Kenny Baker, the actor inside R2-D2, sat quietly eating a sandwich, a quietly comedic reminder that behind every legendary piece of cinema is a great deal of ordinary, unglamorous human waiting. In 1923, racing cars thundered across the rooftop test track of the Fiat factory in Turin, Italy, a breathtaking feat of industrial ambition that placed a working automobile circuit 5 stories above the city's streets. A hairdryer from the 1920s stands as a bulky, impractical-looking ancestor to a household device now taken entirely for granted, a reminder of how recently the tools of everyday grooming were invented and how dramatically they have changed. Photographed in 1962, a young Wilt Chamberlain ran track during his high school years, already carrying the extraordinary physical presence that would make him one of the most dominant athletes in the history of professional basketball. In 1956, ducklings were used as part of a medical therapy program, their small, waddling presence brought into clinical settings as a gentle and warm-hearted tool for healing at a time when animal-assisted care was still a novel idea. Igor Kostin's radiation, flecked photograph of Chernobyl reactor number 4, taken on the morning of the 26th of April 1986, is itself scarred by the invisible force it was documenting. The physical damage to the film, a record of the disaster's deadly reach. In November 1944 in Walcheren, a Dutch woman refused to be separated from her husband, a German soldier, and chose to accompany him into Allied captivity, a deeply human moment of loyalty that cut quietly across the lines of war. In 1912, a fashionable young woman stepped from a New York City streetcar as a gentleman watched on, a fleeting social tableau from an era when the etiquette of public space was still governed by a very precise and visible set of unspoken rules. Around 1900 in the United Kingdom, before alarm clocks were widely affordable, knocker-ups were hired to walk the streets each morning, tapping on bedroom windows with long poles, waking workers in time for shifts they could not afford to miss. London fashion in the 1960s burst with color, geometry, and deliberate provocation as a generation of young designers and wearers used clothing to announce that post-war Britain had no intention of holding on to the formality of the world that came before it. In 1918, Helen Keller met Charlie Chaplin, two of the most extraordinary public figures of their age, in an encounter that brought together a woman who had reshaped the world's understanding of disability and the man who had made the entire world laugh. A Christmas dinner during the Great Depression consisted of turnips and cabbage, a sparse and quietly heartbreaking meal that speaks to the daily resourcefulness and quiet dignity of millions of families simply trying to hold together through years of profound hardship. During the early 1950s in Korea, two soldiers held each other in a moment of mutual comfort amid the exhaustion and grief of a war that would claim millions of lives and leave an entire peninsula divided for generations. Three young men posed outside a fish and chip shop in the 1970s with easy confidence, their casual stance and period clothing a warm and unpretentious snapshot of ordinary working class British street life in a decade of sharp cultural contrasts. A couple walked the streets of New York on a spring day in 1915, their unhurried pace and closeness capturing a quiet intimacy within the city's constant movement, just months after the world had lurched into a war that would change everything. In 1989, Pink Floyd performed in Venice, their music filling one of the world's most impossibly beautiful cities with sound in a concert that drew enormous crowds and left a lasting controversy over the damage the event caused to the fragile historic site. In London in 1955, music shop customers listened to the latest record releases alone inside soundproof listening booths, a quietly intimate ritual of discovery that has no real equivalent in an era of instant streaming and infinite digital access. In 1981, the rock band Queen posed with Diego Maradona in Argentina, two of the most electrifying performing forces of their generation meeting on the same frame before either had yet reached the absolute height of their global fame. In Dodge City, Vietnam in 1967, a soldier received a cake baked to mark his 20th birthday, a small ceremony of normalcy carried out within the constant danger of a war, a reminder that youth and celebration persisted even in the most desperate of places. In 1945, the gadget, the world's first atomic bomb, was assembled and tested in the Nevada desert, its detonation opening an era of destructive power so absolute that it permanently and irreversibly altered the nature of warfare and global politics. In 1945, the French countryside provided a quiet backdrop for a child reading in the company of a friendly goat. Robert Dusnot's photograph capturing a moment of simple rural peace in a country still emerging from years of occupation and war. In Naples in 1880, a street vendor sold cold water and fresh coconut to passers-by, his trade a small but essential thread in the dense weave of daily commercial life that kept the city's crowded streets alive from morning until night. Around 1927 in Washington, D.C., photographer Walter Lehman traveled the United States with his small dog Pocahontas. The two of them together, a quietly charming portrait of a wandering life, spent documenting the breadth and variety of the American landscape. In 1953 at the Madison Square Boys Club, youngsters read three-dimensional comic books with paper glasses perched on their noses, a scene of pure childhood delight from a decade when the novelty of 3D technology felt like a glimpse into the future.